What happens when a single glance at a stranger's hand rewrites everything you believed about your family's past? For Rebecca Walsh, a 26-year-old bartender barely keeping her head above water, that glance would transform her entire world. For Harrison Blackwell, a man who commanded boardrooms with a single phone call, it would crack open the carefully constructed fortress of his family's history. She was mixing drinks to pay for her father's experimental treatments. He was just another wealthy patron. But when she noticed the distinctive cufflink on his wrist, a design she'd seen 1,000 times in a faded photograph at home, a spark of recognition ignited a wildfire that would consume decades of carefully guarded secrets. The Edison Bar occupied a narrow brick building on the east side of downtown. At 11 on a Wednesday night, Rebecca Walsh wiped down the mahogany bar top, her shoulders aching. The tips had been decent, but they were never enough when measured against her father's medical costs. Thomas Walsh was dying, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. There was an experimental treatment, but the cost was astronomical. The door opened, admitting a man in an expensive overcoat. He was perhaps 40, with dark hair touched with grey and eyes like aged whiskey. He settled at the bar with practiced ease. "Macallan, 25, neat." As Rebecca poured, she set the glass before him. That's when she saw it. His left cufflink caught the light, white gold, crafted like a compass rose with tiny diamonds. At the center was an intricate monogram, HJB. Rebecca had seen that exact design in a photograph on her father's nightstand. A younger Thomas stood beside another man, both grinning. The other man wore a watch with that same compass rose, the same monogram. Her father had told her the story countless times. His business partner, the architect who designed buildings with him. A man who disappeared one day with everything, leaving Thomas with nothing but debt. "Sir, your cufflink, that design, where did you get it?" Harrison Blackwell's hand froze. "I beg your pardon?" "My father has a photograph. A man he worked with wore something exactly like that." His eyes sharpened. "Your father's name?" "Thomas Walsh. He was a contractor. 30 years ago he had a partner." "That's impossible." "These were custom-made for my father, Jonathan Blackwell, in 1992. There is no other set." "I'm not mistaken. I've looked at that picture my entire life." Harrison's expression darkened. "Are you suggesting this is a calculated encounter?" "I'm telling you what I know." He dropped several $100 bills on the bar. "For your trouble, keep it. I want to understand why you're wearing something that belonged to a man who destroyed my father's life." Harrison stood. "Your father is either confused or a liar. My father built Blackwell architecture through brilliance and hard work. I suggest you focus on your actual work." He left. Rebecca's co-worker Sam approached. "What was that about?" "I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out." She texted her father's nurse, "Coming by tomorrow. Need to talk to Dad." The response came quickly. "He's been asking for you. Says he has something to tell you." Across the city, Harrison examined his father's watch in the dim light of his study. Along the inner edge of the clasp were tiny numbers, 2 to 2, 2 of 2. If there was a second, there had been a first. He called his security chief. "Natalie, run a background check. Thomas Walsh, start 30 years ago." The next day, Rebecca sat at her father's bedside. Thomas's eyes held unexpected clarity. "I know why you're here. You met Harrison Blackwell. Dad, what's going on?" Thomas closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were wet with tears he'd held back for 3 decades. "Jonathan Blackwell was my business partner, my friend, and the man who stole everything I built." The story poured out. They'd met in 1992, formed Harper James Building Company, designed 3 revolutionary buildings together, the Riverside Commons, Heritage Towers, and Meridian Center. Equal partners with everything in writing. "We were going to change the city," Thomas said, his voice growing stronger with the telling. "Not just build buildings, but create spaces that brought communities together. Jonathan had the artistic vision. I had the engineering know-how. We were unstoppable." He described working side by side, arguing over designs late into the night, celebrating each permit approval like it was Christmas. They were more than partners. They were brothers in purpose. Then one Monday I came to the office. Everything was gone. The designs, the contracts, even the coffee maker. 3 days later, the permits were transferred to Blackwell Architecture. Jonathan claimed the designs were solely his. I tried to fight, but every document had vanished. My name was only on our private partnership agreement, and that disappeared. Without it, I had nothing. Thomas gestured to his nightstand. We had matching pieces made to celebrate the partnership. He designed cufflinks, I designed a watch clasp. Same compass rose, same monogram, each engraved 1, 2, and 2 to 2. We flipped a coin to see who got which. Rebecca found the worn watch band. The engraving read 1, 2. I lost everything. The house, my savings, my reputation. Became a day laborer. I was too ashamed to tell you. Every time you asked about my past, I couldn't bear to say the words out loud, that I'd been foolish enough to trust completely and lose everything. Rebecca held his hand, tears streaming. We're going to make this right, Dad, I promise you. That morning, Rebecca's phone rang. Natalie Chen, Harrison's security chief, invited her to his office. She gathered everything. The watch band, the photograph, old business cards, a faded blueprint she found in her father's belongings. Harrison's office overlooked the city from Heritage Towers, one of the stolen buildings. When she arrived, he looked guarded but less hostile than before. I had my team work through the night. He pushed a thick folder toward her. This is the original partnership agreement between Thomas Walsh and Jonathan Blackwell. I found it in my father's papers, hidden in a locked safe I'd never opened. Rebecca's hands shook. There it was, Harper James Building Company, equal partnership, both signatures. He kept it, she whispered. Why would he keep it? Guilt, maybe, or insurance. Or maybe some part of him knew it was wrong. Harrison pulled out more papers. There's more. Letters from my father to yours. Dozens of them, spanning years. Never sent. Apologies, justifications, excuses. She read the first one. Dear Thomas, I know what I've done is unforgivable, but I need you to understand. I didn't have a choice. They gave me an ultimatum. Who? Harrison stood walking to the window. His reflection in the glass looked haunted. My uncle Richard, my father's older brother, a real estate developer. He wanted into the Harper James projects. When my father refused, Richard used leverage, gambling debts from years before. He told my father to cut Thomas out completely, or Richard would destroy him publicly, ruin his career before it started. So your father chose to destroy mine instead, Rebecca said bitterly. Yes, and he spent the rest of his life trying to convince himself he'd done the right thing. These letters, they're pathetic attempts at self-justification, but they also document everything. Richard's threats, the coercion, the timeline. Harrison sat heavily. Richard died 15 years ago. He left his stake to me and my brother Marcus. We had no idea the company wasn't wholly our father's. The paperwork was buried in shell corporations and offshore accounts. Richard was meticulous about hiding the truth. Rebecca looked at the evidence spread across the desk. My father is dying, she said, her voice breaking. He has weeks, maybe days. And the man who orchestrated his destruction died beyond any justice. My family owes yours a debt that can never be repaid. But let me try. Let me pay for his treatments, his care, whatever you need. He pulled out a checkbook. Rebecca stared at it, feeling anger rise like bile. No, excuse me? I said no. You think you can just write a check and erase 30 years of suffering? My father doesn't want your money. He wanted respect, recognition. He wanted the world to know he built those buildings, not in a private meeting with expensive lawyers. In a way that matters, in a way that lasts. If I publicly acknowledge this, it could damage the company. While you're calculating damage control, my father is dying in a hospice bed, carrying the weight of a lie that destroyed his life. You're just like them, choosing to protect the Blackwell name over doing what's right. She gathered her papers and left. Harrison sat frozen, her words cutting deeper than any business setback ever had. That evening, Harrison met with his younger brother Marcus at their family estate. Marcus was an architect like their father, passionate where Harrison was pragmatic. When Harrison told him everything, Marcus's face went pale. This can't be true. Dad was my hero. I became an architect because of him. I know. And I'm sorry. But look at these. Harrison showed him the partnership agreement, the letters, the evidence. Marcus read in silence, his hands trembling. Finally, he looked up. Every building I've designed, every award I've won, I thought I was honoring his legacy. But it was all built on stolen ground. Not all of it. You're talented, Marcus. Your work is your own. But the foundation, Marcus's voice broke. The 3 buildings that made the Blackwell name, that opened every door for us, they weren't his alone. And he let Thomas Walsh suffer in silence for 30 years. The brothers sat in their father's study, surrounded by his awards and accolades, seeing them all in a new, tainted light. What do we do? Marcus asked finally. I think we need to meet Thomas Walsh, hear his story directly, not through letters or lawyers. We need to look him in the eye and decide what kind of men we want to be. At the hospice, Thomas was surprised to see both Blackwell brothers. Marcus approached first, extending his hand. Mr. Walsh, I'm Marcus Blackwell. Jonathan was my father. I need you to know I had no idea. None of this. Thomas studied the younger man and saw genuine anguish. Sit down, both of you. For 2 hours, Thomas told them everything. Not just the facts, but the feelings, the excitement of those early days, the trust he'd placed in Jonathan, the devastation of the betrayal. He showed them his original sketches for the buildings, rough drafts that clearly bore his hand. Marcus examined the drawings with an architect's eye. These load-bearing calculations, this is brilliant. The way you integrated the support structure with the aesthetic elements. I've studied these buildings my whole life and never understood how Dad achieved this balance. Now I know. He didn't, you did. Thomas smiled weakly. We did it together. That was the beauty of it. His vision, my engineering. We made each other better. Why didn't you fight harder? Marcus asked, echoing the question others had asked. I did fight. I hired a lawyer with money I didn't have. But your father was smart. He'd made sure he was the public face of everything. I was the invisible partner. When the partnership agreement disappeared, I had nothing but my word against an educated architect with connections. I lost. Harrison leaned forward. Mr. Walsh, I want to make this right. Not with money, but with truth. We want to publicly acknowledge what happened. Rename the buildings to include your name. Create a fellowship in your honor. Tell the complete story. Thomas looked at him with surprise. Why would you do that? It destroys your father's reputation. Because it's the truth, Harrison said simply. My father made his choice 30 years ago. Now Marcus and I are making ours. Rebecca, who had been standing quietly by the window, felt tears streaming down her face. There's one condition, Thomas said, his voice firm despite his weakness. Your father's name stays on those buildings too. He was weak, he did terrible things, but the designs were ours together. The creative work was collaborative. I won't erase him any more than I want to be erased. Let the buildings remember both of us, the partnership that could have been. Harrison felt something crack in his chest. This dying man was showing more grace than any Blackwell had shown in 3 decades. Agreed. Harper James Blackwell, 3 names, 1 legacy. The complete truth. But in a luxury condominium across town, someone was listening. Victoria Blackwell Sterling, Richard's widow, sat with her phone pressed to her ear, receiving updates from a junior executive she'd planted in Harrison's office years ago. Her face was white with fury. She'd spent 15 years living comfortably off the dividends from Richard's stake in the company. If the truth came out, if lawsuits started flying, if the company's reputation collapsed, she would lose everything. Her lifestyle, her social position, her security, all built on the foundation of Richard's theft. She made a call. Mr. Patterson? This is Victoria Blackwell Sterling. I need your services. Someone is trying to destroy my family's legacy, and I need you to stop them. Whatever it takes. Jeremy Patterson was expensive, discreet, and utterly without scruples. Tell me about the targets. A dying contractor with delusions and his bartender daughter trying to extort money from my nephews. I need them discredited completely before they can do any damage. Consider it handled. The sabotage began subtly. 3 days later, a gossip column ran a suggestive item about Harrison Blackwell frequenting downtown bars and striking up intimate conversations with female bartenders. The implication was clear. This wasn't about business. It was about something tawdry. Then, an anonymous email arrived at the hospice administration, claiming Thomas Walsh had been fired from the partnership for embezzling funds. Attached were forged bank statements showing suspicious deposits into accounts bearing Thomas's name. Building inspectors suddenly appeared at construction sites where Thomas had worked decades ago, claiming to have discovered evidence of code violations and dangerously shoddy work. Local news stations received anonymous tips about Thomas Walsh's history of alcoholism and employment problems, painting him as an unreliable man who blamed others for his own failures. Rebecca watched in horror as her father's name was systematically destroyed in the media. Hospice staff began treating her with suspicion. Former neighbors called with uncomfortable questions. "This is exactly what they want," Rebecca told her father during a particularly dark visit. "They want us to give up, to take whatever settlement they offer and sign a non-disclosure agreement." Thomas, weaker now but still fighting, squeezed her hand. "Then we don't give up. The truth doesn't become a lie just because people shout louder." "Your grandmother used to say that. She was a wise woman, but the attacks escalated. The worst came when Rebecca arrived at the hospice one morning to find 2 police officers standing outside her father's room. "Ms. Walsh, I'm Officer Martinez. We need to ask you some questions about your father's medical care." Rebecca's heart seized. "What, is he okay?" "We received a report that you've been administering unauthorized medications to your father. The allegation is that you're attempting to hasten his death to secure an inheritance or settlement from the Blackwell family." The words hit like physical blows. "That's insane. I'm trying to keep him alive. I've been working myself to death to pay for his treatments. We understand this is upsetting, but we have to investigate. Someone submitted these medical records showing irregularities in his medication schedule corresponding to your visits." The officer showed her a folder with official-looking documents. Rebecca looked at the papers and recognized the hospice letterhead, but not the information. "These are fake. Call the nurses. Call his doctors. They'll tell you I've never touched his medications. I don't even have access to them. We will verify everything. But in the meantime, we need you to refrain from visiting your father until the investigation is complete. You can't keep me from him. He's dying. He might only have days left." Officer Martinez's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Miss Walsh, but if these allegations prove true, we need to ensure his safety. You can't see him until we clear you." Rebecca stood in the hallway, watching through the window as her father slept, completely unaware that his daughter had been barred from his side. Her hands shook as she called Harrison. He answered immediately. "Rebecca, they're trying to separate me from my father. Someone filed a police report claiming I'm trying to kill him to get settlement money. Harrison, I can't even see him. What if he wakes up and I'm not there? What if—" Her voice broke. "Where are you?" "I'm coming right now. Don't move." 20 minutes later, Harrison arrived with Natalie Chen and their attorney Gerald Fletcher. They huddled in a waiting room while Fletcher made urgent calls and Natalie pulled up records on her laptop. The allegations came from an anonymous tip to the hospice administration, Natalie reported, her fingers flying across the keyboard. But the fake medical records were professionally forged. This wasn't some random person with a grudge. This required resources, expertise, and inside access to hospice paperwork. Fletcher hung up his phone. "I've spoken with the hospice director and the lead detective. They're going to expedite their investigation. But Rebecca, until they officially clear you, you legally cannot see your father." "I'm sorry." Rebecca sank into a chair, her head in her hands. Everything she'd fought for, every truth she'd tried to expose, had led to this, being kept from her dying father's side while strangers decided if she was a murderer. Harrison sat beside her. For a long moment he said nothing. "Then this is Victoria. It has to be. She's Richard's widow." She has the most to lose if the truth comes out. Can you prove it? Fletcher asked. Not yet, but Natalie's working on it. Harrison looked at Rebecca. I brought this down on you. If I'd just paid you off quietly like Fletcher suggested, you'd be with your father right now. Don't you dare, Rebecca said, looking up with fierce eyes. They want us to believe that silence is safer than truth. That people like my father should just accept whatever scraps the powerful throw them and be grateful. I won't give them that victory. But my father would rather die alone knowing I fought for the truth than die with me beside him knowing I surrendered to lies. He taught me that integrity matters more than comfort. I won't dishonor that now. Harrison looked at this young woman, exhausted, heartbroken, facing down people with unlimited resources, and felt ashamed that he'd ever considered taking the easy path. Natalie, whatever you need, you have it. Unlimited budget, unlimited access. Find the connection between Victoria and these attacks. Already on it, Natalie said, her expression grim with determination. Meanwhile, Victoria Blackwell Sterling sat in her penthouse apartment, sipping wine and watching the news coverage of the troubled bartender who'd made wild accusations against the respected Blackwell family. Patterson had done excellent work. By morning, no one would take Rebecca Walsh seriously. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patterson, final phase complete. Target is isolated. Recommend maintaining pressure until she accepts settlement offer and signs NDA. Victoria smiled. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways. Richard had taught her that. When you couldn't win cleanly, you won dirty. And you always won. But across town, Natalie Chen had just cracked open a shell corporation that had been carefully constructed to hide its true owner. She followed the money trail through 3 offshore accounts, 2 holding companies, and finally to a single name, Victoria Blackwell Sterling. The payment to Jeremy Patterson, $500,000, spread across multiple transactions, each one corresponding to an attack on Thomas or Rebecca Walsh. Natalie looked up from her screen, her eyes bright with triumph. I've got her! Every payment, every transaction, all leading back to Victoria. She's left a trail she thought was untraceable, but it's all here. Harrison leaned over to see the evidence. Bank records, email metadata, payment authorizations, a complete paper trail of conspiracy and fraud. This is enough for criminal charges, Fletcher said, examining the documents. Conspiracy, fraud, filing false police reports. She's facing serious prison time. Good. Harrison said coldly. But prison can wait. First we expose her, publicly, completely, at the Foundation Gala in 3 days. Rebecca stood up slowly. My father needs to see it. He needs to witness justice happening, not just hear about it later. We'll set up a live video feed from his hospice room directly to the gala, Marcus said, joining them. He can watch everything, and if he's strong enough, he can speak. The world needs to hear from him directly. For 3 days, they prepared. Natalie compiled every piece of evidence into a devastating multimedia presentation. Marcus worked with audio-visual teams to ensure perfect connectivity between the hospice and the ballroom. Harrison and Fletcher coordinated with the mayor's office and the district attorney, ensuring law enforcement would be standing by. Rebecca spent the time barred from her father's room, but she sent him messages through the nurses, explaining what was coming, asking him to hold on just a little longer, promising him that the truth was about to break free. The night of the Blackwell Foundation annual gala arrived cold and clear. The Grandview Hotel's ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and 500 elegantly dressed guests. The city's elite had turned out, prominent architects, real estate developers, city council members, philanthropists, and journalists from every major publication. Victoria Blackwell Sterling arrived fashionably late, draped in diamonds and designer silk, her smile confident and victorious. She'd won. The Walsh girl was discredited. The old man was dying alone, and by next week, this whole ugly affair would be buried under legal settlements and non-disclosure agreements. She had no idea what was waiting for her. The dinner proceeded elegantly. Fine wine flowed, courses of exquisite food were served, speeches were made about the Blackwell Foundation's charitable work. Polite applause followed each presentation. Rebecca stood in the back of the ballroom, wearing a dress that Marcus's wife had insisted she take. Simple, elegant, black. Sam had come with her for moral support, squeezing her hand as they watched the evening unfold. "You've got this," he whispered. "Your dad would be so proud." Finally, after dessert was cleared and coffee served, Harrison Blackwell took the stage. The room settled into expectant quiet. "Good evening, and thank you all for being here tonight. I know you're expecting the usual program, awards, recognitions, perhaps a video montage of beautiful buildings and smiling beneficiaries. But tonight, my brother and I have something different to share, something that's been hidden for far too long." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victoria, seated at a prominent table near the front, set down her wineglass carefully, her expression alert but not yet alarmed. 32 years ago, my father, Jonathan Blackwell, entered into a partnership with a man named Thomas Walsh. Together, they founded Harper James Building Company. Together, they designed 3 buildings that would become architectural landmarks in this city: the Riverside Commons, Heritage Towers, and Meridian Center. Behind him, the massive screens lining the ballroom flickered to life, showing the photograph of young Thomas and Jonathan side by side, grinning at the camera, full of hope and ambition. "My father's entire career was built on those 3 buildings," Harrison continued, his voice steady and clear. "They established Blackwell Architecture as a serious firm. They made his reputation. They made our family's fortune. But they weren't solely his work. They were the product of a true partnership between 2 brilliant minds." The photograph changed to show the original partnership agreement, both signatures clearly visible. Then in 1993, that partnership ended, not through mutual agreement or natural dissolution, but through theft. My father took the designs, took the contracts, took the credit, and left Thomas Walsh with nothing but debt and a destroyed reputation. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Guests turned to each other, seeking confirmation of what they were hearing. Victoria half rose from her seat, her face going pale. Harrison held up a hand for silence. "When I first learned this, I thought it was the complete story. My father's moral failure, a betrayal born from weakness and ambition. But the truth goes much deeper." New documents appeared on the screens, Richard Blackwell's letters to Jonathan, detailing threats, ultimatums, the gambling debts he held over his younger brother's head. My uncle, Richard Blackwell, orchestrated this theft. He wanted into the lucrative Harper James projects, and when my father refused to betray his partner, Richard gave him an ultimatum: cut Thomas Walsh out completely, or Richard would destroy Jonathan's career before it ever started. Richard provided the capital, took 60% of the profits through hidden shell corporations, and helped construct an elaborate fiction that Jonathan Blackwell was a self-made genius who'd built everything alone. Harrison paused, letting the information sink into every mind in the room. Then he gestured to one of the screens, which now showed a live video feed. Thomas Walsh appeared on screen, sitting propped up in his hospice bed. The camera was close enough that everyone could see his face clearly, gaunt and aged by illness, but with eyes that burned with clarity and purpose. "This is Thomas Walsh," Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. "The man my family erased from history. The man whose genius helped shape this city's skyline, but whose name was stolen from the buildings he helped create. I'd like him to tell you, in his own words, what was taken from him." The ballroom fell into absolute silence. Thomas looked directly into the camera, directly at the 500 people watching him, and began to speak. "Good evening. My name is Thomas Walsh. I'm 64 years old and I'm dying. But before I go, I want you to know who I was. 32 years ago, I was a builder with a dream. I met an architect named Jonathan Blackwell, and together we imagined something beautiful, buildings that wouldn't just house people, but bring communities together. Buildings that balanced form and function, beauty and practicality." His voice was thin but steady, each word carefully chosen. "Jonathan had the artistic vision. I had the engineering knowledge. We needed each other. The Riverside Commons, Heritage Towers, Meridian Center, those weren't one man's achievement. They were the product of late nights arguing over blueprints, of compromises between aesthetics and structural integrity, of two men who made each other better. He paused, gathering strength. Then one Monday morning I came to our office and found it empty. Everything was gone. 3 days later, I learned that the permits had been transferred, the contracts reassigned. Jonathan Blackwell had become the sole owner of our dreams. I tried to fight. I hired a lawyer I couldn't afford, but every document proving our partnership had vanished. Without proof, I had nothing but my word against an educated, connected architect. Thomas's eyes shone with unshed tears. I lost my house, my savings, my reputation. I spent 30 years as a day laborer, building other people's visions, never allowed to create my own. I spent 30 years wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing, if maybe I really was the nobody everyone said I was. But I wasn't. I was a builder. I was an architect. And those buildings out there, he gestured vaguely toward the city beyond his window, they're mine as much as they were ever Jonathan Blackwell's. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the ballroom. Hardened real estate moguls wiped away tears. Journalists frantically took notes. Even the serving staff had stopped to watch, moved by the quiet dignity of a dying man finally telling his truth. Harrison took the microphone again, his own eyes wet. My brother Marcus and I have decided that these wrongs must be made right. Effective immediately, Riverside Commons, Heritage Towers, and Meridian Center will be officially renamed. They will become the Harper James Blackwell Commons, Towers, and Center. All future promotional materials, historical records, and architectural documentation will acknowledge Thomas Walsh as co-designer. His contribution will never be erased again. The applause started slowly, then built into a thunderous wave of sound. People rose to their feet. We're also establishing the Thomas Walsh Fellowship for working-class architecture students, young people from backgrounds like Thomas's, who have the talent but not the resources to pursue their dreams. The fellowship will be funded in perpetuity with an initial endowment of $50 million from the Blackwell family. More applause, louder now. And we're creating a traveling exhibition that will tell this complete story, the collaboration, the betrayal, the decades of silence, and finally, the revelation of truth. It will visit architecture schools and museums across the country, ensuring that Thomas Walsh's contribution to American architecture is celebrated and remembered. As the applause continued, Harrison's expression hardened. But there's one final truth that needs to be told tonight. Because when Marcus and I decided to reveal this history and make amends, someone tried to stop us. Someone with a vested interest in keeping the lies alive, in protecting the fortune built on stolen work. Victoria Blackwell Sterling stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. A wine glass tipped, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. This is absurd. I'm leaving. Sit down, Victoria, Harrison commanded, his voice carrying an authority that froze her mid-step. Or I'll have security escort you back to your seat. Your choice. 2 security guards appeared at the exits, their presence unmistakable. Victoria looked around wildly, seeing no friendly faces, no allies. Slowly, she sank back into her chair, trapped. Victoria Blackwell Sterling is Richard Blackwell's widow, Harrison said, his voice cold and precise. She's been living very comfortably for the past 15 years off dividends from Richard's stake in Blackwell Architecture, a PG stake built entirely on the stolen work of Thomas E. Walsh. When she learned that Marcus and I were planning to reveal the truth about our family's history, she took action to stop us. The screens now displayed bank records, clear and damning. She hired a man named Jeremy Patterson, a specialist in reputation destruction and crisis management. She paid him $500,000 over the course of 2 weeks to systematically destroy Thomas Walsh's credibility and discredit his daughter Rebecca. More documents appeared. Emails, payment records, text messages. she orchestrated a smear campaign. She planted false stories in gossip columns, suggesting inappropriate behavior. She created forged financial documents claiming Thomas had embezzled from the partnership. She had building inspectors file false reports about his past work. She fed stories to news outlets about alcoholism and incompetence. The crowd was silent now, horrified. And when none of that was enough to silence the truth, she filed false allegations with police, claiming that Rebecca Walsh was attempting to murder her own dying father to secure settlement money. Audible gasps echoed through the ballroom. People turned to stare at Victoria, whose face had gone from pale to flushed with rage and humiliation. These allegations were investigated and found to be completely baseless, Harrison continued. But they succeeded in their goal. They separated a dying man from his daughter during his final days on Earth. They caused immeasurable pain to people who had already suffered 30 years of injustice at my family's hands. Rebecca felt Sam's hand squeeze hers as Harrison gestured toward her. Rebecca Walsh is here tonight. She's the woman who had the courage to notice a cufflink in a bar and refused to let the observation pass. Who fought for her father's truth when everyone told her to be quiet and take the money. Who stood up to billionaires and lawyers and coordinated attacks, never wavering in her belief that her father deserved justice. Rebecca walked through the crowd to join Harrison on stage, feeling hundreds of eyes on her. She was no longer nobody's bartender. She was Thomas Walsh's daughter, and she held her head high. Harrison handed her the microphone. For a moment, Rebecca couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the magnitude of this moment. Then she looked at the screen, at her father's face, and found her voice. "My father taught me that the truth matters," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Even when it's hard. Even when it costs you everything. Even when powerful people tell you to shut up and be grateful for whatever scraps they throw you." He lived 30 years, carrying a secret that poisoned him from the inside, believing that no one would ever listen to someone like him. But he was wrong. She turned to face Victoria directly. "You tried to destroy us because you were afraid. Afraid that if the world knew where your comfortable life really came from, stolen dreams, stolen work, stolen futures, you'd lose everything. But you know what? My father already lost everything 30 years ago, and he survived. He survived with his dignity intact, with his integrity intact, with his soul intact. Can you say the same?" Victoria sat rigid, her jaw clenched, her eyes blazing with impotent fury. From the screen, Thomas's voice rang out one more time. "Mrs. Blackwell Sterling, I pity you. You've spent your entire life living off stolen goods, and you've become so comfortable with dishonesty that you can't even recognize truth when it's staring you in the face. But here's what I know. I built beautiful things. I had a vision and the skill to make it real. I brought dreams out of the abstract and into the concrete. What have you built? What will you leave behind besides a legacy of cruelty, lies, and desperate attempts to cling to money you never earned?" The silence that followed was absolute and damning. Victoria looked around the ballroom, seeing nothing but condemnation in every face. Even her own tablemates had physically shifted away from her, as if proximity alone could taint them by association. "I want every piece of evidence turned over to the district attorney immediately," came a strong voice from the crowd. The mayor of the city stood, his expression grim and resolute. "If what's been presented here tonight is accurate, and it certainly appears to be, then Mrs. Blackwell Sterling has committed serious crimes. She needs to face the full consequences of the law." "The evidence is already being delivered to the DA's office as we speak," Harrison said. "We contacted them this afternoon. There will be a comprehensive investigation, and we will cooperate fully." Victoria's attorney, who had been sitting frozen at her table, stood abruptly and began moving toward the exit. Victoria saw him leaving, saw her last defender abandoning her, and something inside her seemed to shatter. Her carefully maintained composure crumb. What happens when a single glance at a stranger's hand rewrites everything you believed about your family's past? For Rebecca Walsh, a 26-year-old bartender barely keeping her head above water, that glance would transform her entire world. For Harrison Blackwell, a man who commanded boardrooms with a single phone call, it would crack open the carefully constructed fortress of his family's history. She was mixing drinks to pay for her father's experimental treatments. He was just another wealthy patron. But when she noticed the distinctive cufflink on his wrist, a design she'd seen 1,000 times in a faded photograph at home, a spark of recognition ignited a wildfire that would consume decades of carefully guarded secrets. The Edison Bar occupied a narrow brick building on the east side of downtown. At 11 on a Wednesday night, Rebecca Walsh wiped down the mahogany bar top, her shoulders aching. The tips had been decent, but they were never enough when measured against her father's medical costs. Thomas Walsh was dying, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. There was an experimental treatment, but the cost was astronomical. The door opened, admitting a man in an expensive overcoat. He was perhaps 40, with dark hair touched with grey and eyes like aged whiskey. He settled at the bar with practiced ease. "Macallan 25, neat." As Rebecca poured, she set the glass before him. That's when she saw it. His left cufflink caught the light, white gold, crafted like a compass rose with tiny diamonds. At the center was an intricate monogram, HJB. Rebecca had seen that exact design in a photograph on her father's nightstand. A younger Thomas stood beside another man, both grinning. The other man wore a watch with that same compass rose, the same monogram. Her father had told her the story countless times. His business partner, the architect who designed buildings with him, a man who disappeared one day with everything, leaving Thomas with nothing but debt. "Sir, your cufflink. That design, where did you get it?" Harrison Blackwell's hand froze. "I beg your pardon." My father has a photograph. A man he worked with wore something exactly like that." His eyes sharpened. "Your father's name?" "Thomas Walsh. He was a contractor. 30 years ago he had a partner." "That's impossible." "These were custom-made for my father, Jonathan Blackwell, in 1992. There is no other set." "I'm not mistaken. I've looked at that picture my entire life." Harrison's expression darkened. "Are you suggesting this is a calculated encounter?" "I'm telling you what I know." He dropped several $100 bills on the bar. "For your trouble. Keep it. I want to understand why you're wearing something that belonged to a man who destroyed my father's life." Harrison stood. "Your father is either confused or a liar. My father built Blackwell architecture through brilliance and hard work. I suggest you focus on your actual work." He left. Rebecca texted her father's nurse, "Coming by tomorrow. Need to talk to Dad." The response came quickly. "He's been asking for you. Says he has something to tell you." Across the city, Harrison examined his father's watch. Along the inner edge of the clasp were tiny numbers, 22, 2 of 2. If there was a second, there had been a first. He called his security chief. "Run a background check. Thomas Walsh, start 30 years ago." The next day, Rebecca sat at her father's bedside. Thomas's eyes held unexpected clarity. "I know why you're here. You met Harrison Blackwell." "Dad, what's going on?" Thomas closed his eyes. "Jonathan Blackwell was my business partner, my friend, and the man who stole everything I built." The story poured out. They'd met in 1992, formed Harper James Building Company, designed 3 revolutionary buildings together, the Riverside Commons, Heritage Towers, and Meridian Center, equal partners with everything in writing. Then one Monday I came to the office. Everything was gone. 3 days later, the permits were transferred to Blackwell Architecture. Jonathan claimed the designs were solely his. I tried to fight, but every document had vanished. My name was only on our private partnership agreement, and that disappeared. Without it, I had nothing. Thomas gestured to his nightstand. We had matching pieces made. He designed cufflinks. I designed a watch clasp. Same compass rose, same monogram. Each engraved 1, 2, and 2 to 2. Rebecca found the worn watch band. The engraving read 1 to 2. I lost everything. Became a day laborer. I was too ashamed to tell you. Then we'll make him know the truth. That morning, Rebecca's phone rang. Natalie Chen, Harrison's security chief, invited her to his office. She gathered everything, the watch band, the photograph, old business cards. Harrison's office overlooked the city from Heritage Towers, one of the stolen buildings. When she arrived, he looked guarded. I had my team work through the night. He pushed a thick folder toward her. This is the original partnership agreement between Thomas Walsh and Jonathan Blackwell. I found it in my father's papers. Rebecca's hands shook. There it was, Harper James Building Company, equal partnership, both signatures. There's more. Letters from my father to yours. Never sent. Apologies, justifications. She read, Dear Thomas, I know what I've done is unforgivable, but I need you to understand I didn't have a choice. They gave me an ultimatum. Who? My Uncle Richard, my father's older brother, a real estate developer. He wanted in. When my father refused, Richard used leverage, gambling debts. He told my father to cut Thomas out or be destroyed. Harrison sat heavily. Richard died 15 years ago. He left his stake to me and my brother. We had no idea the company wasn't wholly our father's. My father is dying, Rebecca said, her voice breaking. And the man who destroyed his life died beyond any justice. My family owes yours a debt. Let me pay for his treatments. He pulled out a checkbook. Rebecca stared at it, then said firmly, No. What? My father doesn't want your money. He wanted respect, recognition. He wanted the world to know he built those buildings. Not in a private meeting, in a way that matters, in a way that lasts. That would damage the company. While you're thinking about protecting your reputation, he's dying, carrying a lie that should never have been his burden. You're just like them, choosing to protect the Blackwell name over doing what's right. She left. Harrison sat frozen. She was right. He called his brother Marcus. We need to talk. It's about Dad. Hours later, Harrison told Marcus everything. Their attorney warned of liability, suggested a private settlement. But Harrison insisted on speaking with Thomas first. At the hospice, Thomas told them the complete story. When Marcus asked why he didn't fight harder, Thomas said, Your father could have come to me. We could have faced Richard together. But he chose to save himself. That's not being forced. That's being a coward. The words hung like a verdict. He kept the partnership agreement, Harrison said, and wrote letters trying to justify it. Good, neither did I. Harrison stood. The truth should come out. The building should bear both your names. We want to create an exhibition, rename the projects, establish the Thomas Walsh Fellowship for working-class architecture students. Thomas stared. Why destroy your father's reputation? Because it's the truth. My father made his choice. Now I'm making mine. One condition, Thomas said. Your father's name stays too. The designs were ours together. I won't erase him. Agreed, Harper James Blackwell. 3 names, 1 legacy. But someone had been listening. Victoria Blackwell Sterling, Richard's widow, hung up her phone, furious. She'd been eavesdropping through a company contact. If the truth came out, her comfortable life would evaporate. She called a crisis management specialist named Patterson. Stop this Walsh girl before she takes everything. The sabotage began. Gossip columns ran items about Harrison and bartenders. Anonymous emails claimed Thomas had embezzled with forged bank statements. Building inspectors appeared at old sites. News stations received tips about Thomas's alcoholism. Rebecca watched her father's name being destroyed. Then came the worst attack. Police officers appeared at the hospice. They'd received a report that Rebecca was administering unauthorized medications, possibly attempting murder, to secure a settlement. That's insane. I'm trying to keep him alive. We need you to refrain from visiting until the investigation is complete. Rebecca was barred from her dying father's side. She called Harrison, breaking down. Harrison arrived with Natalie. This was coordinated, professional. Fletcher made calls but confirmed Rebecca couldn't see Thomas until cleared. This is my fault, Harrison said. If I just kept quiet, don't you dare. They want us to believe the truth isn't worth the cost. We're not stopping. Natalie worked through the night. Finally, she cracked it. I've got her. Bank records, emails, all leading from Victoria to Patterson. The proof was irrefutable. Payments escalating with each attack. The final payment, $200,000, memo, final solution. We can have her arrested, Fletcher said. No, Harrison said. We confront her publicly. At the Foundation Gala in 3 days. We force her to confess everything, her sabotage and Richard's role. We get the complete truth out. My father needs to see it, Rebecca said. Live video feed from his hospice room. They spent 3 days preparing a multimedia presentation documenting everything. The night of the gala, the Grand View Hotel ballroom glittered. Victoria arrived in diamonds, confident. After dinner, Harrison took the stage. Tonight, my brother and I have something different to share. 32 years ago, my father entered a partnership with Thomas Walsh. Together, they designed the Riverside Commons, Heritage Towers, and Meridian Center. The screens showed the photograph, then the partnership agreement. Then my father took everything and left Thomas Walsh with nothing. But my father wasn't the architect of this betrayal. My uncle Richard coerced him. Documents appeared, Richard's ultimatum letters. A live video feed appeared. Thomas Walsh in his hospice bed. This is Thomas Walsh, the man my family erased. Thomas spoke for 10 minutes, describing the partnership and betrayal. The room was silent, many in tears. Harrison continued, "We're renaming the buildings Harper James Blackwell. We're establishing the Thomas Walsh Fellowship with $50 million. We're creating a traveling exhibition." Thunderous applause. But when we decided to reveal this, someone tried to stop us. Victoria stood, knocking over her wine. "I'm leaving." "Sit down, Victoria." Security guards appeared. Victoria Blackwell Sterling hired a specialist to destroy Thomas's reputation. The screens showed bank records, emails, payment authorizations. The room gasped. Rebecca joined Harrison on stage. "My father taught me the truth matters. He lived 30 years carrying this secret. But he was wrong. The truth doesn't care about money or power." She faced Victoria. "You tried to destroy us because you were afraid. But my father survived with his integrity intact. Can you say the same?" Victoria's face twisted with rage. "You self-righteous nobody." "Enough." Thomas's voice from the screen. "I pity you. You've lived off stolen goods. I built beautiful things. What have you built besides cruelty and lies?" The mayor stood. "I want the evidence turned over to the district attorney." "Already done," Harrison said. Victoria's shoulders sagged. "Richard told me before he died how he'd forced Jonathan to steal. He laughed about it. I knew, all these years. I took the money and told myself it didn't matter. But it did matter," Marcus said quietly. Victoria nodded, tears streaming. "I'm sorry." Thomas was quiet. "Then I accept your apology. But acceptance doesn't mean there won't be consequences." The next morning, Rebecca returned to her father's room. "We did it, Dad. The whole city knows." Thomas smiled weakly. "I saw everything. I can rest now." "Don't talk like that. Listen, you use that fellowship. Finish school. Become an architect. Build beautiful things, honestly." "I will. You already have. You built the truth." He closed his eyes, peaceful. When the sun rose, Thomas Walsh took his last breath. He died as an honored architect. His obituary told the complete story. Thomas Walsh, architect and visionary, dies at 64. The funeral filled the Grandview ballroom. Harrison and Marcus sat beside Rebecca. After the service, Harrison gave her an envelope. "My father left this with the partnership agreement." Jonathan's letter. "Dear Thomas, I've written 100 letters trying to apologize. I never sent any because no words could make it right. But I want you to know, not a day passed that I didn't think about what we could have built together. I stole your work, but I couldn't steal your integrity. I'm sorry. I'll die sorry, Jonathan." Rebecca folded it carefully. "He could have sent this, made things right. But he chose silence." "I know. But now the silence is broken." 3 months later, the Thomas Walsh Fellowship awarded its first scholarships to working-class students. Marcus approached Rebecca with blueprints for a community center in her old neighborhood. "Help me make it right. This will be the first Harper James Blackwell project done properly. On one condition, we put a plaque telling the whole story. Already planned." A year later, Rebecca stood before the completed center, watching children play. The plaque read, "The Thomas Walsh Community Center," built on the principle that beautiful spaces belong to everyone, and that the truth about who creates them should never be erased. "In memory of Thomas Walsh, architect, dreamer, and guardian of integrity." Her phone buzzed. "Harrison, board meeting next week. Want to discuss making you a permanent consultant? Interested? Rebecca looked at the building, at the plaque, at her architecture school acceptance letter, fully funded by her father's fellowship. Yes, she typed, very interested. The compass rose had finally found true north, and Rebecca Walsh, guardian of her father's legacy, was ready to help build a world where people like him would never be erased again. This story reminds us that truth has its own timeline, that courage is a bartender noticing a cufflink and refusing to stay silent, that the powerful may write history, but someone brave enough can rewrite it. Thomas Walsh got his justice, Rebecca got her father's legacy restored, and the Blackwell brothers learned that the greatest inheritance is the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of truth over lies, if you've ever felt invisible while the powerful take credit, share this story. Let it remind others that their contributions matter, their truth matters, and justice is always worth fighting for. What would you have done in Rebecca's position? Would you have challenged a billionaire? Would you have kept fighting? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things in pursuit of truth and justice.